Welcome to the Creative Industry Insight podcast, a podcast that looks at various roles in the creative world. I'm your host, Bobby. Today's guest, production designer Eric Schoonover, joins us to talk about their work on Barry. Please be warned, there are heavy spoilers in this episode, so sit back and relax as we jump into the conversation with Eric. Hi, Eric. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to have you on to talk about Barry, which is in its fourth and final season, which is a sort of show that has just gotten better and better with each season. I don't know if you agree with me on that, but it's just one of those that's just kind of blown away by the story and the sort of standalone episodes as well, where there are some standout scenes and episodes in each series where you just think, I can't believe that this is happening in a sort of 30-minute comedy episode. And I'm really excited to see where it's going and where it's going to sort of end up.
Yeah, I would totally agree. The show has definitely evolved in a lot of different ways. I think in all facets, in all crafts of the show, we've all evolved so much. I just told Bill one of the last days on set that caught him in the stairwell. I was like, we've just not to criticize what we did in season one, but we've all evolved so much. Him as a director and writer and probably actor too, but I was talking more about the behind the scenes and that we've all just really developed our craft so much. And it's just miraculous to see the differences in the way we do things and the end result being, what you see on TV is just really remarkable. And I'm so proud of having had been a part of that show. It was just, I'll probably say it a bunch of times, but really great experience in so many ways.
Well, I think you're always going to be proud of something when I don't know, there's so much that goes into it. Because it's funny how, as you said, the show's evolved from that first series of just sort of going from having Barry go to a acting class and having it quite contained to now seeing these big motorbike chases on the freeway. It's kind of just like you wouldn't have expected the show to sort of go that way, but it feels organic and natural that it has.
Yeah, I don't really know if he had a master plan when he got started. I don't think so. Maybe he had a rough idea of kind of what was happening, but yeah, just the tone and the style has changed so much. I don't know that you could really plan for that. I guess you could, but I just know him being a relatively new director, you could just really see him coming into his craft and, me into mine too. And yeah, we all just got better and tighter. And yeah, it was really special.
Well, because you've been on the show since pretty much day one, because you started out as art director for season 1 and 2, and then in season 3, the big promotion to production designer. So just so we go back from the start, how did that job come about? And then what was the step up like to production designer from art director?
Well, yeah, when I even first getting on the show as the art director was a huge step up for me, coming from a mostly commercial background. I got my start as basically an art assistant in music videos and commercials and things like that. So it was a completely different world from jumping into television. So the production designer I used to work for, Tyler Robinson, he said, "Hey, I just had a meeting with HBO and Bill Hader, and we were on another show called Baskets, a Zach Galifianakis thing." And he said, "You want to come along for the ride?" And I was like, "Oh my God." We were both, I would say, definitely in over our heads walking into season one because we had never really been involved with anything that had like sound stage, like stage space, or the amount of builds we were doing, which wasn't that huge. Looking back, it wasn't that huge for the first season or two, but anything we were building was crazy. And it was like one of the first tasks was recreating a theater, changing it up a bit, but they had shot the pilot, which we weren't involved with, but recreating a theater that was in Los Feliz in LA, designing and building that on one of the stages at Sony. And all of a sudden we were there pulling in through the gates at Sony. And it was just like, it wasn't scary. I knew I could do it, but it wasn't, I just didn't really know all the steps that went into doing something like that. As far as, I didn't even really know the tasks of an art director at that point. So it was a lot of like trial and error. Just if there was a fire burning, I would just do my best to put it out and move on to the next thing. But I felt like I did a good job. I don't know if traditional art director, I was a little bit different than that, but I felt like I was doing a good job, and I wasn't maliciously trying to steal the job of production designer, but I was interested in becoming a production designer, and it's something I had done before on commercials and other things like that. I'd worked my way up, so it wasn't a brand new concept to me. The execution would be totally new, but I knew I was capable and had the toolbox to put my plans into action, and I knew I was good at communicating and at learning. I was like a sponge. So when I think it was the production designer finally just told me that he didn't want to work in LA anymore. He, like me, he lives up in Portland, Oregon. That's where he calls home. So I think that was part of it. He didn't want to work in LA at that time. So I just told Alec and the other co-creator, or sorry, Bill and the other co-creator, Alec Berg, as we were wrapping up season 2, I just said, "Hey guys, I would really like to be considered for the job of production designer for season 3." And they were both just like, "Oh yeah, totally, man." And I was just like, "Okay, well." And a couple bystanders were like wide-eyed, like, "Holy shit, did you really just do that?" And I was like, "Oh, I had to do it. I didn't want to walk away from the project, and I sure as hell didn't want to art direct for another designer. I felt like I had learned enough about the show, the people involved, in the job that I could pull it off. I know I needed a good support team, but I knew I could do it." So anyway, the season got closer and closer, and I was just kind of, sitting by the phone, just like, what the hell is happening? Am I going to get this or what? And Aida Rogers, the producer, and I would talk, and she would say, "Oh, just keep doing what you're doing." I was production designing a couple little small projects here and there, and she's like, "Just keep doing that. We'll see what we can do." And I talked to Alec Berg's assistant one day, and he's like, "Yeah, Alec approved, gave you the nod of approval." And I was like, "Oh shit. Well, what about Hader? I haven't heard from him, and we're not on necessarily like a call him on the phone randomly basis." So I was like, "Well, how do I find out about what Hader's thinking?" And I was at some crazy party in LA before the Emmys one year, and not to just name drop and shit like that, but it was exciting for me because it was like all the Saturday Night Live people, all these NBC people, Larry David, Ted Danson. And so I don't know. A friend of mine got me into the party. I wasn't even invited, but I was just like, it was already awesome. And then I heard that Fred Armisen was there, and someone I had worked with a lot of years ago on a show called Portlandia. And in my mind, I was like, well, what did he think of me on Portlandia? Did he think I had what it took to design a show, any show, let alone this show for HBO? So in my mind, weeks before that, I was like, I don't know, crazy enough to think that Fred Armisen and Bill Hader were going to be chatting about me. So I was just like, what the fuck is Armisen going to say? Is he gonna get me the job or not? I don't, for whatever reason, I really thought they were going to chat about me, and he had some sway. So I see Fred, I go up, hug him. He said, "Hey, how you doing?" And he said, "Hey, I was talking to Bill Hader about you yesterday." And I was like, "Oh my God." And then I was like, "Well, what did he say?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, he basically just said I was in there for season 3, and I just left the party just on top of the world." Like, well, I don't know, like it's such a great day in my memory. But yeah, then it was just getting to work on figuring out who to hire to back me up. And I knew I needed a strong art director, great set decorator, which I used the same one, Rachel Ferrara from season 2 for season 3. So that was definitely helpful to have consistency in that. But I knew I needed to replace myself as art director. So this guy, Andrew Leach, who is a production designer now, stepped in and just hit it out of the park and had my back. And we made a great team. And that was kind of how it came to be.
There seems to be a lot to take in from there, because we'll go back to when you started as the art director. That must have been such a big learning curve, going from doing a lot of set building work and understanding what needs to go in to that, because I think some people don't realize like how much time and work in actually designing and making something look good on the stage takes a lot of time, and then also understanding the sort of size of what something needs to look. So if you were in your normal room to you that looks normal, but if you go on a set, that could be like 3 times the size just because of
Yeah.
the layout, really. And then, but on top of that, I guess when you're sort of thrown in the deep end, it's like a sink or swim moment, I guess. And if you sort of just say, basically, you take it on and then just see what happens, really. But what I do like as well is like that story of how you got the production designer job, having that sort of thought in your mind, like, oh my gosh, what should they talk to me? What are they going to say? You know, do I need to slip Frank a 20 just to see if he can put in a good word for me?
Yeah.
But then I think that's also hearing how people, probably how highly people talked about you in these conversations is also a testament to how you work and how the work that you've done and the sort of hours and time and hard yards that you put in.
Yeah, and I think that's something that made my transition better, or it made me kind of setting myself up for success. Not that I'm the most successful by any means, but success with that show is that I didn't give anyone any attitude, and I didn't, I listened to people that knew what they were talking about, even if they were down the food chain, or whatever you want to say. If they had a lower ranking position and they were a carpenter on, a set builder, I would listen to them and learn from them just as I would learn from talking to Bill or a producer. And I just had a great respect for everyone that went into building all these things and doing all these tasks. I didn't necessarily know who did what, and I didn't really know what questions I would need to answer. Like I wouldn't know like what I was really responsible for. But I just let it flow and took it as it came and did research where I needed to and had the right conversations, but just keeping a great rapport with everyone in all different departments really helped me out a lot, because it wasn't like, oh, I need to make sure I'm nice to everyone so we can make things happen. But people having respect for you really helps get things done. So that was important to me, and it just kind of worked out, and made a bunch of friends along the way. So yeah, I feel really lucky, but just having a respect for people is a super important thing in anything I'm doing in life. But I take that to work with me as well.
Yeah, 100%. I think you could always, there's never, there's that old saying, it's like you always learn something new every day. And I think if you're on a set with some people who have been doing it for like decades, once you start listening to all people are fountains of knowledge or experts in what they're doing. So then there's a lot that could be taken in from that, especially if there's something you don't know. Better to be a fool once than a fool all the time.
For sure. Absolutely. Not being afraid to ask those questions, like something that seems so simple now, being nervous about asking a question because you're putting yourself out there. And like, I guess there was a slight fear of like people wondering how the hell I got the job, or whatever the case may be. But putting that fear aside and just, asking those questions, listening to the people that are chatting with you, and being grateful for the knowledge that you're receiving from them is a really beautiful thing. And it's, obviously it helps with the evolution of filmmaking, and just helps the world go around in a more peaceful way. And
going to Barry and your work on it, when you're stepping up, did you feel that there was not necessarily added pressure, but in terms of, because your whole job has changed? And also I feel like that's when the pivot happened as well, in terms of the story and how much bigger the show got. Did you feel like your work had changed a bit? And did you feel like that it was more like getting back into the swing of things after from stepping up?
well, I felt like there was definitely added pressure that a more established production designer might not have felt, because I know people were looking at me like, this guy might not know what he's doing. And I know that Bill was definitely, he knew who I was, and he would tell people, oh, this is Eric, we promoted him to production designer. So I knew that wasn't far from the front of his mind. It wasn't like, but we just kept nailing it, kept pulling stuff off time and time again. And so I know he gained the confidence in me quickly. And I know it was probably Aida Rogers that did convince him to hire me for whatever reason. She believed in me too, but yeah, it was a bit of pressure, but I stayed the same. I felt like I still was me, and I rolled into these situations with a similar attitude that I had as art director. My job changed, and a lot more people were looking to me for answers than they were with me as art director. But it was a natural progression, I think. And I think not all of us can do it, or not all people even want to do it. There are plenty of art directors that are content with being an art director. But for me, I knew that I wanted to progress into production designing. So I felt like I had the skill set and had most of the knowledge. It was a matter of kind of letting a bit more creative juices flow through me, instead of, as an art director, it was a lot more of facilitating things happening based on what the production designer had dreamt up. I knew what that part took. So I knew that, probably in the back of my mind too, when I would come up with an idea, or just a regular overall design, I knew how it was more or less going to be executed, and I knew what needed to happen to make that. And I think that's a good quality to have for a designer, to have a little bit sense of reality. It's great to come up with concepts and things like that, but it's also good to be aware of your timeline, the strain you're putting on your crew, both set deck and construction and whoever else you have involved. So yeah, it was definitely a juggling act, and something I felt like I've gotten a lot better at, as far as that goes. Just knowing what's important, and when to push harder, and when to accept what you're seeing as far as like a finished set goes. Because sometimes you just need to get something in front of the camera, and other times you do have time to really finesse things. So it's kind of just picking and choosing those battles as far as delivering sets. So
Yeah.
that's something that was a little bit new to me, but it's been working.
Once you have those sort of different parameters to work with, and going from there, it will become, as you said, it becomes new, but you sort of just take it along and sort of take the baton and go with it. Jumping into the fourth series of Barry, there seems to be, the scale of the show seems a lot bigger than it has been previously, with the show sort of feeling like it was more set in bars and little theatres, and now we've kind of gone into prisons, silos, a house in the middle of nowhere. It seems like the themes in Barry with locations and spaces is the use of space in them. With the show, it feels like the bigger certain things get, the bigger the space becomes on screen. So, for example, like the Chechens, when you're first introduced to them, they're in a house, they have a garage. Once their operation grows, it becomes a warehouse, it becomes bigger. It's the same with, I guess, with Barry, is that when you're with him and acting class, the theatre is quite small. And then once their ideas get bigger, their sort of spaces get bigger. So the apartment becomes big for the different, when the actors are staying together, in terms of having like a whole area where they do recordings and whatnot. And then also the idea of like the prison, where you not necessarily have ultimate space, but you're caged in an area, but you do have those bigger spaces like the communal space. How do the themes of space play in your design, and how is it ever sort of alluded to on the script?
No, it isn't. I mean, I never, that's funny that I hadn't thought about it much, but it's, as far as from a building standpoint, I kept like having to ask the AD or the producer. I was like, are we just building like so much more these years? It seems like so crazy to me. But like I said, I don't know if it's because I was designer or because we actually were, but no, we actually were just building so much more. And as far as spatially speaking, I never read that in any script, and I I can't help but think it might have just been me getting more and more comfortable with the builds and wanting to just build bigger and bigger stuff. And maybe our budgets were getting bigger too, so we could afford to go bigger and bigger. But it was always a concern with me, the producer, the DP, to give everybody enough room. And so that might be the set's getting bigger. I don't know that it was anything directly mentioned, but it's very interesting that you say that, because yeah, it does make sense. And I don't, that would be amazing if that was a note from Bill from years ago, like, oh, we keep getting bigger and bigger every time. But no, I think that's just a thing, and that's awesome of you to notice that. But maybe just like a happy accident, or me just getting greedy with the builds.
Well, maybe I've read it all too much into it, because I was kind of having that question play on my mind, because there are those scenes where you're kind of looking at how the space is being used. I know I was reading an interview about the prison and how you were building that, which I kind of have some follow-up questions on that. But the prison itself, because I can imagine designing and looking for prisons quite difficult, especially if you want to have one that looks a specific way. I remember when we worked on a show, we were using a prison, and the whole idea of like having a designer work on that and then think how it should look. But it's not just the look of the prison, it's like the camera movement and how the scene's going to be blocked. How many sort of times did you go through designing the prison with these sort of things in mind? And did it change a lot throughout the whole process, or was it always going to be a set sort of look?
Well, yeah, the prison, it wasn't an entire build, but the funny thing is I started designing something kind of based off of some prisons in California and doing just a bunch of research on how they look and how they function and what happens when you go in, just all kinds of research about it, which was kind of crazy, but gave me some crazy dreams at night. But we sort of found a prison that we liked, and the prison was kind of crazy enough to let us go there, which we added some walls here and there. And I mean, it was so intense when we went to scout that we didn't talk a lot about what the overall plan was, because I can't help but think all of us were a bit in fear of our lives going into that kind of environment, because it's just, you're relatively safe, but you're talking to these guards and like, well, those are the guys that are going to save my life if something goes down. I don't like, it was just a crazy, I did all the research, but I'd never been there. So going in and hearing that gate clink behind you and knowing that you're just in there and whatever's bound to happen, we weren't like walking around with like max security inmates, right? Well, kind of, but I never really felt we were actually in harm's way, but just in the back of your mind, it's a little bit unnerving. But as far as the camera work and the shots in those environments, it's a lot of, I mean, not to discredit Carl Hersey, the DP, but Bill just has such an idea of what he wants to do. And that might even change on his car ride to the location or the set. But, we just always try to give him enough space, knowing that he could just pull something out of thin air, and we have to make sure it's doable for him. So, the grips and us and camera department, everyone was kind of on their toes and loving and supporting everything we did. It was just like a big family. So no one would ever care if all of a sudden it's like, no, we talked about this specifically, and all of a sudden we're on a dolly once we get there. And we're like, well, okay, well, what do we need to do to make this thing picture ready? And usually it always was, but shaking things up a bit on the day was always enjoyable. And I would try to be there as much as I could to open up each set, just because I had the most knowledge on the subject and had the dialogue with Bill and Carl and Gavin, the AD, who I love so much. But no, just a crazy process that it was, like I said, it was beautiful to see the evolution of that process from back in season 1 to, the final days of season 4, and shooting in that prison and all the places we went, and the growing of our sets. And it just got really, really great.
Going when you visit prisons and you hear that clink, yeah, it is the sort of most creepiest thing and scariest thing. And I think because I guess because we've seen so many shows with prisons and the sort of various characters that might be there. Because when I filmed in a prison, it was abandoned, but even though it's abandoned, it still looms over you what is there. And sometimes if you hear guards tell you stories, I don't know if it's just a case of them messing with you to scare you, but then some of the things they say, you're like, well, this is not good.
Yeah, I was concerned about going there for sure. But too many times I'll watch something and it's quite obvious that, yeah, it's either an abandoned prison that doesn't have modern technology in it, or it's a build and it doesn't look close, because they get to be so much money, unless it's a complete prison show then that has the budget for that. Building something like that is just astronomical, because the space is so vast, and you could get clever. And we were already thinking about clever ways to make cells in the background look real, and just having dummy doors on some functioning. But when you're talking about multiple levels like that, it just gets super complicated. And I was excited to try to go for that, but they weren't about ready to spend that amount of money. So when this location came up, I couldn't really believe it was like we were actually going to be allowed to go there. And I still can't believe that they let us do it. Hopefully they're okay with it. But without that location, it would have been really tricky. And yeah, maybe they would have found the money, but it was going to be a lot just because, yeah, it's just so big. And it's hard to know what VFX could have helped out with to make it look bigger. But we didn't really have the stage space when it came down to it based on all the other stuff that came up in season 4. We were pretty jam packed with 2 sound stages on the Sony lot. So we didn't really have the space to build it. I was designing one with stage 27 in mind, which is a huge stage, but I was a bit relieved for the sake of our construction department because that would have been a lot to try to execute building that big of a set. But I was excited by the prospect of it, and yeah, a bit relieved when we found that location. And then we got to build some fun stuff, some cells and some halls and a bunch of the rooms that we're in. Basically, anytime we're in a room in that prison, it's something we built on stage, which is great. It was really fun to pull elements from the actual place we were going, embellish them, change them up according to what I was into or what I thought, might suit our shooting crew, as far as the size and things like that. But yeah, those prison sets really add up at the cost. I just remember having so many conversations, even with the rooms we were building, like wanting just to go way bigger and give even more layers. But there's a certain cap where they're like, no, we're not going to spend that amount of money. We're in there for 2 scenes. But I'm like, well, can't we just do one more window and one more hallway in the background? I'm like, no, it's just gonna be a solid wall. So those conversations, which were never heated by any means, and it was, yeah, more like me just wanting to add as much as I could to that project, really giving that thing my all, and just being super focused on giving the best sets we could afford and had time to build, and just to what would make a great show look as good as it could.
When you're talking about the build on the stages and the difference in going being like location and stage work, just how much more work it would be to build. But something that comes into mind with the prison is the like transition a bit in one of the episodes. I think it's episode 2 or 3 where Barry is in the prison and then it transitions into the sort of desert plains, should I say, which is quite a neat trick, which I'm curious to know, was that a sort of more of a match cut for the camera department when it sort of transitions there? Or did you have the set built for then the camera to move onto the desert area?
We took the cell to the Midwestern plains of the United States. So it was a cell that we had, we had a couple of different cells, but yeah, we would basically just take that out there and, have a clear on the tech scout, just get a clear understanding from Bill what he was hoping to achieve as far as what the move was going to be and what we were actually going to see inside the cell. Because yeah, when we first read or he first explained what he wanted to do with those shots, it was a little bit hard to know. We were probably all thinking about ourselves, the DP thinking about what he's going to do, and me thinking about, well, what do you actually need out there from us and all those things. But we would clarify all those things on the tech scout, and we were out on that location days before setting up those sets with enough time to kind of tweak anything. But yeah, I thought those shots ended up really nice, and I don't know if they were confusing to others or not, but yeah, they were really beautiful kind of dream sequences that he thought of. It really great.
Yeah, I think it was slightly jarring seeing it, but then also it was sort of just like, oh, what's happening here? Do we get to dive into somebody's psyche, or kind of just trying to see like, well, where is this going? And then as the season sort of progresses, you understand what you're seeing. I think another big part of season 4 was quite a shocking scene, as well as like the sandpit scene in the silo. I think it feels like something straight out of a horror film with what happens. And I think as an audience member, well, maybe myself, you knew something sinister was going to happen, or something was going to happen that somebody would slip. And obviously, as the scene progresses, there is something that, the sand opens up on the characters and basically takes out the whole crew of a sort of crime utopia henchmen. How did you go about designing the silo, and what went into it to make it A, safe for people to go in, and then B, for it to work to pull off the scene?
Yeah, that was quite an undertaking. We probably had 1,000 meetings about that. So yeah, it started off, and Bill all the while was saying, if it's not safe, I don't want to do it. If it's not safe, I don't want to do it. So first thing was first, nothing to do with the silo or the build, is how do we make that gag work? Like what type of mechanics are involved, and how do we do that? So it was, the stunt coordinator, Wade, and it was Ryan Riley, the special effects coordinator, myself, the producers, first AD, kind of without Bill, trying to get a grasp of how or if we could even pull this thing off. So kicking around a bunch of ideas, all of us sketching out stuff on the, me getting slightly frustrated, like, can you just let me figure this out? But I needed the help. It was it was crazy, a crazy engineering feat. So all of a sudden we were talking to HBO Safety about what we wanted to do. And they're like, well, yeah, sand is quite combustible. I think it's the celiac or something in the sand, but they were like, so we do run the risk of like basically this thing blowing up. And we were just like, what did they just say? So we kind of reported back to Bill, and then he was like, no, 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 okay, we're changing the script. We're gonna do this other thing, this other gag. And so we're hearing him out on this. He's trying his best to explain himself, and we were just like, oh man, we don't know about this other thing either, which wouldn't have been nearly as dramatic as this. And then I don't know what led to it, but he was like, okay, the sand silo is back. We're doing the sand silo. Let's figure this thing out. So, a lot of sketches, some scale model tests, and just kind of basically the green light to the special effects department to start putting this thing together, which involved hydraulics and a lot of steel, all just a huge custom build. And yeah, and like I was saying, all of us, us in my department doing like little scale model tests of if the physics behind this idea would actually work, and if it would, how it would look, and then passing that info on to VFX, seeing if they needed to do much work. I don't think they actually needed to end up, doing that much, and that we could always fall back on Laura Hill, the VFX supervisor, who was just so awesome to be around, but and so good at her job. But knowing we could fall back on them, we kind of figured like, oh, worst case, we'll shoot it. If it looks like shit, she'll fix it. We were always like, where's Laura? She'll fix anything. But it just started working. So I remember we were on a director's scout kind of out in the deep valley doing something. And we're like, oh, we're going to roll over and see, check in on Ryan and the effects team. And we just couldn't fucking, we all got on this platform, and it just worked. The idea worked. It was with a few less people, but we got so excited. And then it came to be my turn a little bit more, as far as, figuring out the actual look of this silo, the overall size, and how it was going to look. I grew up in the Midwest, and so I know what a lot of, I know what silos look like, and I know, the function and the mechanics behind those things, but this was kind of like a hybrid of sorts. So it wasn't exactly like your typical sand silo. And this sand trafficking does exist, and it is a real thing. So I learned a bunch of research on how that all comes about and what happens with that. It just came down to what the surface needed to be. So we decided on like a classic silo of this corrugated tin and this 50-foot diameter for the size of the silo. So the thing was massive, and I feel like it photographed large, but it was way bigger than it actually ended up looking on the final cut, but just enormous. And so much time went into it, and so many different departments had their hands on it, which obviously adds so much more time and money. The thing was just enormous, and I was just so proud to have like been a part of it, and for it to actually have worked, and just to see the gag happening when we were filming, it was insane, because it was controlled, and I think it was pretty safe, I would say, but it took real legit stuntmen to be able to go through this thing, because they were basically, it was like if you jumped into water, you were just engulfed in this material, and I think you just had to hold your breath at the exact right time and get out of the way and free yourself. And it was being down below this thing and watching these guys come out was just, it was insane.
I just think like the whole scene itself, even when you're talking about sand, how saying it's like combustible because probably many people didn't know that. And once you do like the light setup, it probably was like, well, if we use these certain lights, then going to put everything up in flames. But on top of that, the when you think of like a silo, it's quite a like they're very specific looking things, aren't they? In terms of how they look and how they design and how they function. I think when you're talking about growing up in the Midwest and using those silos as a sort of starting point, did you ever have to do like that sort of weird research of how a silo would have developed over the years from using certain materials or a certain design that it's going to sort of that the sort of evolution, as we say, of a silo and how you would incorporate that in your design?
No, not exactly. I kind of just based it off of the sure size that Bill was hoping for, and just kind of pointed my finger to a style of silo that is that large. So it's pretty unique to what the function is of something that big. They're scary. I've been in like much smaller ones, but it's really crazy. It's not uncommon for like Midwestern kids to like play around in those things, but it is really dangerous to even do that. No, not so much the evolution of the silo, but more just like what would make sense, what would be visually stimulating, and what Bill had in his mind, kind of balancing all that stuff together. And yeah, just what I kind of thought would look the best on camera as far as, the ceiling had certain details that weren't necessarily authentic to that type of silo, but just working with the DP and myself and the art director on what we could achieve in the timeline, what we could afford, and what would look the best. And VFX did help a little bit with the extension on the lid because we could only build so much, and we just needed a little bit of love extending that. But I was happy that we at least got to build as much as we did. And we didn't need to build a 360-degree silo, but we built probably 2/3 of it. And we had a couple wild walls, which are huge pieces that we moved around for a few shots just to kind of like change where the door was, or remove the door and add a solid wall, depending on what our angles were. And just a few of the little gags in there that helped us kind of execute how Cristobal was submerged, which I think worked out really well. And then him going under, and that shot of the camera dipping in underneath the sand and then pulling back up was pretty fun.
I think as well that like just that haunting image of like the sand, the camera goes down into the sand, and then you kind of everything goes dark and muffled and so claustrophobic.
That was
And
really beautiful. Really happy with the way that little sequence turned out, let alone like, the biggest feat was obviously the bodies dumping through the middle of it. But then when it came down to some other more technical stuff of how we keep Michael Irby safe, Cristobal, how we keep him safe and comfortable when he's kind of being submerged too, and coupling that with that crane shot of the camera dipping into the sand, working with the grip department on how we execute that. And then just even reloading this whole thing to do another take was such a feat in itself. But there were so many different departments just cranking away on this and making it all happen was really, really a great like display of what we can accomplish as a team when everyone comes together. And everyone was just so excited by the sheer magnitude of this set that people were down to help. It wasn't just like, oh, just another shitty thing that we have to deal with. It was like, no, this is like, they knew it was big. Everyone knew it was big because it was because it was big. But no, I just would go up so often in the catwalk above that stage, which is like 80 feet, I think, and take progress photos. So it's really, really fun to look back at those photos. And yeah, just like, my family asking, how did you do this, or how did you do that? It's just awesome moment.
I think having that when your family starts talking to you about like how do you do this, how do you do that, it's just the magic of filmmaking. We can't give away our secrets. But there's also I want to talk about is the designing of like film sets and the idea of your not your own show, but it's like it feels slightly meta that you're in LA and there's so much that goes on, but then you have to design a film set that's going to look normal to what you would design anywhere else, if that makes sense.
Sorry, are you talking about how we do a show within the show, or are you
Yes,
just
yes. Sorry, yeah, that's what I mean. It's just like you'd have so in season four with the superhero,
Mega
um,
Girl? Yeah.
yeah. When I see something like that, it's just sort of funny to see because it feels so authentic in terms of the trailers, the green screen or blue
Yeah.
screen in this case, the sort of going onto a big sound stage and having people around. Do you sort of just walk around the Sony lot to get inspiration, or do you just sort of play out of like what's just needed and sort of make note of what sort of extra bits that you'll need in those scenes?
It wouldn't be hard to just make the soundstage look. I mean, it basically we could have just walked in and shot a lot of that, depending on what the setup was. But no, it was a lot of fun. In season three, we did Laws of Humanity, and so it was fun building these little sets. Oh yeah, and season three was also Joplin, the TV series that Sally was on. So yeah, season three it seemed like it had even more. It was bananas, but no, it was fun. We definitely embraced where we were, so we at least had a good base coat of that backstage look. But just adding certain pieces to heighten that, and just to embellish it a little bit more. Lighting was a key factor as far as having the right work lights. It's quite dark once we're up and running in those type of environments, unless the house lights are on, which they're mostly like fluorescent lights, so they don't create the best light. So it was definitely taking a lot of time to light it correctly. Yeah, Mega Girls was super fun because it was just like, yeah, a Marvel movie, just a wacky thing that the writing crew had thought of. And then it's just funny when you get involved in, yeah, ordering a bunch of huge blue screen rags through the grip department of like all of a sudden I'm telling the grips what to order for basically to make my set happen, and then it was important to add all these tracking marks with on the blue rags, these red X's, which ended up looking great. So these were all in renderings I would do through SketchUp, which is usually how I'd work. So depending on what we were seeing as far as a backstage set, I would always still design it and draw it up as if it were a regular set, even if some of these sets were existed, or knowing that we could use the back of flats to block a key plot point from a future episode, or sets we just didn't really want the viewers to see just yet. So they were all designed in the same way I would design any other set, and they were all presented to Bill. Usually they're in the conference room or in the van when we're out scouting, but more times than not, I would get a chance to just present to him, a few designs at a time in the conference room, kind of just going over references of what I think it should look like and what I've designed it to look like. Him just kind of getting it. That would help give him a sense too of what his shots wanted to be when it came time. So yeah, it was kind of funny designing a soundstage set to be a soundstage set. And yeah, it just involved, moving a bunch of our clutter out of the way, or that Mega Girl set was a really fun one. I used a bunch of foam to create part of that set, which I didn't feel great about doing. I hadn't really worked with foam too much, but it just created these great rocks that I felt like we needed for this kind of Amazon vibe we were kind of going for. And that was definitely a fun one. And thinking about it, Wade Allen, the stunt coordinator, had talked about it recently that that set was up at the same time we were shooting out the silo. So you walk into that stage and it was just like these two monstrous sets, when yes, in the past, like you're saying, our sets had been quite small and kind of basic. Then all of a sudden you walk in and there's this enormous sets that were just larger than life. Was really fun for me to get involved in, and kind of just like, I don't know, just go for it. And I guess I just got, over the years, I've been with the show like 6 years with the COVID shutdown and some other some other time they took off to do some more writing, after we were kind of up and running here or there, and they're like, oh, we actually want to pause for a bit and write. So yeah, for 6 years it was always in the back of my mind that I was going to be working on that show, which was a really great feeling to have, and I already miss it. But I'm excited about the future. But that was just one of those unicorns that I don't know how often they come around, where you have somebody that's enthusiastic as Bill, and it's as well received as that show is. and we just got to do a lot of fun stuff. And as much as I learned and as much fun as I had, and yeah, me driving into those sound stages every day onto the Sony lot, or season 2 we shot at Paramount. I never lost that rush of just like going into these places and just thinking about all the history and just how lucky I was to be there. And maybe it wasn't luck, I put a lot of hard work into getting myself here, but there's obviously at least some element of luck, because there are definitely more skilled people out there than me. But it takes a lot of different skills to come together to do something like this, and I felt like I was a good mix and a great fit for that show, and I was just, yeah, like I said, lucky to be a part of it.
Yeah, I think going from your answer that they're telling the sort of like the group department of go for these blue screens, actually go for these ones, when it's like, well, we work with these every day. It's like, but then we're recreating what people work with. It's quite funny to sort of see and feel. And it's the same with the boulders and the looks of those, how something like that, working with like new materials feels a lot different, to get that experience and to sort of understand how that will work and look on the screen. But I think as well, going around set to set is that would make me kind of fun chuckle a little bit, that you're creating a show within a show and then making it look like it would be something set in this universe. Goes for my, just to wrap the episode up, what was your favorite set to design?
Oh man, it was probably the shitty little diner bathroom that we shot in for where Sally's working, when she's out in the middle of nowhere and in the Midwest. She's on the run, but it wasn't that big of a set, or it probably wasn't that impressive, but it was just fun to do research on shitty diner bathrooms. And I knew what they looked like and I knew what I wanted to be, but I always tend to pull references just so I can kind of visualize and show, the producers and Bill and the DP, like what I'm thinking. But just tying those two things together, some details in the hallway leading us into that little bathroom, but it wasn't much of a set, but I just had a lot of fun doing it. And I always like, even before that, I usually take note of, like, I don't know if like Train Spotting got me into it or something, but just like taking a note of how shitty bathrooms can be, and then just trying to add like a real layer of grime, but yet keep it, authentic and not take it too far over the top, but just making it feel real, and having a great sense of accomplishment when the gaffer or the DP or whoever it is just talking about how great that, because I felt great about it, but having these two other people I really admire saying how legit it looks felt really nice. So yeah, probably that little shitty bathroom.
Funny how it's like something so simple, yet so, just a bathroom, but it's so sort of visually interesting, that it can be. I know I said that was my last question, but there's just something I would like to just bring up now. You mentioned it, is because of that time jump, we see Barry married to Sally and they have a kid, and then they're sort of in this house in the middle of nowhere. I just want to ask a design standpoint of that sort of that house, is that it's very sort of sterile and it looks like it's been constructed in terms of like the look on the film, that it's like very like a flat pack house and it looks a bit sort of no life to it. Was that always the plan, or was that something that sort of read off the page?
Yeah, that was sort of always the plan. Initially, I wanted to just build that based on a design, but we ended up finding that trailer. So we augmented it severely, but we had a good foundation to build upon. But yeah, the idea was just to keep it sterile, to put nothing else around it, and just make you feel like you're really in the middle of nowhere, like beyond reality. And I feel like we were kind of safely teetering upon that state of whether or not, because we had seen dream sequences out in the similar landscape, helping the viewer along, and hopefully they were wondering if this was even real or not. But unfortunately, yeah, it was actually real and they were there. But yeah, just to keeping it stark and completely desolate, and they were so alone and just kind of fucked, was kind of the idea.
It's quite a funny idea that, well, not a funny idea, but the idea that they've sort of thrown everything away to be
Yeah.
in this sort of landscape, and there's just so much that you can unpack in terms of the camera work and design work of just how dull their life is now, and there's not even like an ounce of excitement anywhere.
It's really hitting Sally. I think Barry's character is a little bit, or he's fooling himself, and he's found God, and he's kind of seems content. And Sally obviously is far from content, but as soon as there's a problem, Barry's ready to get out of there and go handle his business. But we ended up building the interior on stage, so the interior didn't exactly match the exterior, although we had to finish out the interior on location as well, looking at the front door, because we do take a shot of Barry. We track with him going outside the house after someone knocks on the door, which is a little bit of a dream sequence too. And there's still a more, we're only on, what are we on, episode 5? So there's still there's still some other things going on there that will be really interesting for you to see, I'm sure, in the next episode.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing that, and I'm glad you didn't spoil anything. I know this will come out.
I probably said too much already. Hopefully Bill's not calling. Anyway, well, thank you so much, Robert. It was a great time.
No, thank you so much, and don't you worry, this episode will come out after the whole show airs, so no spoilers, no calls from Bill Hader, no calls from Alec Berg, so you'll be in the clear. Thank you for your time today, Eric. Really appreciate it. Barry is streaming on HBO Max in America, Sky Atlantic in the UK. Go out and catch up before the season finale.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
You too.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.